a new person was added to the list of what are called Bitcoin core maintainers. Each person kind of has like a special domain that they focus on. And so the most recent addition focuses on something called the Bitcoin kernel and the consensus code, which is, I think, one of the most interesting things about this. At the heart of a lot of this discussion, and I think a lot of existential questioning in Bitcoin is Bitcoin Core, which is a client, should Bitcoin Core be the only dominant client? And there's a lot of people who disagree. I have publicly said I want different clients which run Bitcoin. Bitcoin Core is a bunch of code. It's a client, and it's a whole thing. It's got libraries, it's got a wallet component, it's got all these things to it. But what is actually absolutely essential for it to remain in consensus with the other nodes on Bitcoin is this concept of it has to be consensus compatible. So it has to validate the same blocks as all the other nodes, and it's got to have the same opinion about what is Bitcoin. And it's much harder said than done, because it's actually, when you write all this code and you pull it all, it's actually not clear sometimes what is a peculiarity of the actual client Bitcoin Core and what is actual Bitcoin consensus. This is a project to define what even is Bitcoin consensus and separate it so that you can take these rules and this code and build a different client with it. A mysterious new person was just added to the elite 6 people who control Bitcoin. Yeah, you heard that right. There's a conspiracy and only a few people control the fate of a $2 trillion network. This is inside the rabbit hole of how Bitcoin code is governed.
Charlie, is that intro true?
No, the intro is total bullshit. I'm only saying that because it hooks people in, especially Bitcoin critics. And it's been like the subject of Bitcoin criticism over the past year. We've done endless conversation about the filter debates and Bitcoin Core, yada, yada. We won't get into it. But some news happened over the past week, Colin, where a new person whom most people who aren't in Bitcoin development don't know, a new person was added to the list of what are called Bitcoin core maintainers. Now, inside of explaining what this is a little bit of history lesson. It's a little bit of time explaining how GitHub works, and also kind of talking about the social layer of like Bitcoin code. And then we can step back and be like, okay, so who's this new guy? If you're listening to this, you can already go and read a modest profile that we published yesterday on Friday about the new Bitcoin core maintainer, but we'll get into that in a second. So first of all, Colin, do you know what GitHub is?
I do know what GitHub is for sure. But it seems like we might not know everything about the Bitcoin Core GitHub repo per what you were saying before we hopped on the horn here.
Yeah, there's a lot in this. And so I think it's simple to explain what GitHub is. It's basically where it's like the premier place that people go to post and work on and talk about code. And reference code, but you don't actually really need to know all that. It's actually what's more important now is that is to explain like the accounts hierarchy system of how GitHub works. And so you can just know that GitHub is where code goes to live. It's like you almost might call like social media for code /work, like a work for code.
That's what I think is interesting about GitHub is it's simultaneously a database and a social media platform.
Yeah, it's all of that. And so you can have code live in a certain place. So if you've got like a certain project, like a personal project, you can have your profile, you can have different open source projects or like professional, your company projects. You can contribute to all those. Bitcoin Core, which is a client that runs Bitcoin, the effective like the only client that really matters right now, that is where all the code for Bitcoin Core lives. And the organizational structure of who the actual accounts are that coordinate like this big project that is Bitcoin Core, that is what we're going to have to explain. So because it's open source and all this stuff happens out in the open, you have it means that anyone can walk in and say pretty much anything. Now, there is a moderation system, but like people post code, post ideas, people comment on that, and they make revisions, and people comment on those and give feedback. But there have to be like janitors, like moderators of this process, and there have to be people who like push the big red button to turn the proposed code into the official code that you download the file and you run the client for. And so really these are like key holders, but they're more like janitors with keys.
Dare we say custodians, but not in the way that most people think.
It was there all along. It was right under our nose. Yeah, I mean, they're like, so a lot of what they do is just make sure that conversation stays on topic, that the process of like the code review is clean and orderly, and that when it's time to like take code and merge it into the official like program that everybody downloads and runs, they're the ones who have the keys which like officially like do that. There are only a select few people who they're known, they're well known to the developer community, and most of them are pretty doxed, but not fully doxed, depending on their own preference. And they use PGP keys, cryptography, to basically prove that, hi, it's me, Ava Chow, hi, it's me, Gloria, and we're like the ones who are turning the keys and merging this code. I'll also make a point. GitHub is a product that's owned by Microsoft. So like there's an element of trusting the actual platform you're hosting all this on, and there is a different account which owns the repository. So we'll get into that in somewhere down the road. But right now, the most important thing is there's a lot of people contribute code, but there's only a few people who have the keys to merge it. And that is the significance of the news this past week, is that for the first time since February 2023, there had been 5 maintainers. There are now 6. And the 6th maintainer, Sedated, or the Charlatan are his 2 pseudonyms, has been a longtime contributor, and he's well respected in Bitcoin developer community. And so the other developers and a lot of the folks who talk in the various channels about Bitcoin Core all pretty much unilaterally agreed. Yeah, this person's trusted. This person should be given a key to merge the code and make decisions.
Why did they decide to add a 6th maintainer, and who's the current lead maintainer?
Those are both good questions. As far as like a 6th maintainer, there's I actually I don't know if it's super clear. It's kind of one of those things where everybody kind of agrees that this person has earned enough trust. And then there's another dimension, which is of the previous 5 and now 6, each person kind of has like a special domain that they focus on. This may not be as well known. The most conspicuous and controversial one is of recent is Gloria Zhao, who is her specialty and domain has been mempool and relay policy.
Yeah,
which is at the heart of the spam debate. But you have other people who are not as well known. Ryanovsky, who does the IPC. You have Ava Chow, who's more on the wallet side. You've got Marco Falk, who's like on testing. And you've got Hannity Stepanov, who's kind of like the GUI and the build person. And these people have been doing this for years. And so the most recent addition, Sedated, or the Charlatan, focuses on something called the Bitcoin kernel and the consensus code, which is, I think, one of the most interesting things about this. If I could speculate why they're added, at the heart of a lot of this discussion, and I think a lot of existential questioning in Bitcoin is Bitcoin Core, which is a client, should Bitcoin Core be the only dominant client? And there's a lot of people who disagree. I have publicly said I want different clients which run Bitcoin, which are competitive to Bitcoin Core. I think that's good for the health of the ecosystem and decentralization. But to be able to to make that really easy, not everybody agrees on this, by the way. There's a long history of debating this.
I don't know if I agree on it.
Yeah, maybe this is another debate. I gotta finish this thought. So, one of the things that's really difficult to communicate, I think, to average people who don't like live and breathe this, is that Bitcoin Core is a bunch of code. It's a client, and it's a whole thing. It's got libraries, it's got a wallet component, it's got all these things to it. But what is actually absolutely essential for it to remain in consensus with the other nodes on Bitcoin is this concept of it has to be consensus compatible. So it has to validate the same blocks as all the other nodes, and it's got to have the same opinion about what is Bitcoin. And it's much harder said than done, because it's actually, when you write all this code and you pull it all, it's actually not clear sometimes what is a peculiarity of the actual client, Bitcoin Core, and what is actual Bitcoin consensus. And that is where there has been a multi-year project originally started by a guy named Carl Dong, and he left and gave up on that, went to go build VPNs. Now, Satoshi, or the Charlatan, the new maintainer, has actually been working on that a long time and is probably the domain expert in that category.
Are you talking about the Great Consensus Cleanup?
No. I'm talking, that's a PR to like improve the rough edges around consensus. I'm saying that this is a project to define what even is Bitcoin consensus and separate it so that you can take these rules and this code and build a different client with it. And this is one of the reasons that it's like really confusing to explain like what Luke Dash Jr. and Knots is, or what LibBitcoin by Eric Voskuil is. And that's because it is really difficult to build a node implementation, a client, which under all sorts of scenarios remains in consensus with all the other clients from the ground up, if you're building it from the ground up. And so this would basically say, here are actually the rules for what Bitcoin Core considers consensus, and you can take those and go build your own thing. This is, in a way, almost like an admission that this is perhaps a healthy initiative, even if it's not agreed by everybody.
So this is interesting. Two parts to my response to that. So you could almost view Charlatan's ascension as a maintainer as a way to mollify the fire eaters amongst the how should we say, the anti-core crowd, right? Those who want those seditious filter boys who want to peel away from core and start their own, movement behind something like Knots, right? Which is Luke Dasher's or Luke Dash Jr.'s client. Yeah. You could almost view that as saying, okay, you guys are saying that we are trying to concentrate power within core. Well, we're going to give you a template for building your own client that will be compatible with what we're doing.
It is very much like a template. You can think of it like that. It's a template where we're not defining what the template is, just saying like, here's like the basics, so you can go do that if you wish.
Yeah, and so within my second part of this, to play devil's advocate on the other side, you could still see someone taking qualm with this in the sense that, well, this is what core defines as consensus, and they're still the ones dictating what should or should not be followed so that every client is in consensus. I don't agree with that necessarily, because going back to what I was going to say about client diversity, I mean, yeah, in a perfect world, you do have alternate clients that are at least maintained enough to where they can be used in a nuclear scenario where you need to change over. Like if core really was compromised and LibBitcoin and Knots were viable, it's good that those exist, right? But going back to like, we should have these things, or we ought to, I just go back to, we let the market decide, kind of. And the fact of the matter is, the mind share and the competency is in core. They're the ones pushing out the best code. So
that is absolutely true.
Of course, we're going to go with that. Right.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. It's really an unparalleled. Core is the standard and should be the standard until other clients demonstrate themselves like resilient and robust. But a step towards that, it's almost like core like offering an olive branch to the kind of folks like me who think I would love to see a more diverse client set. But it's just so much work, and like nobody pays. It's just hard to get money for it. It's thankless. It's such a weird skill set. It's like if you've got the skills to do that, you could go make $500,000 base salary, like working for some AI company. So like, are you gonna go work for free and have people like hate you because you're like very being criticized? Anyway, so like,
that's a really good point.
Yeah.
You're already making pennies compared to what you could be making at a Coinbase or another like public company or a private company that deals with Bitcoin. And so it's pretty amazing that the ones who have stuck around are dealing with abuse. You know, like shout out to Gloria Zhao, for instance. She got put under fire from the filter crowd with some absolutely baseless and disgusting
vile
accusations.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's out here still just trying to improve the relay. So, you know, the mempool relay policy. So shout out.
We are CleanSpark, America's Bitcoin miner, a publicly traded company with the largest operating hash rate, powered entirely by self-operated infrastructure across 4 states. This is our proof of work, and we are setting the standard for what's next. Learn more about the intersection of energy and Bitcoin at cleanspark.com.
The second question, which I took a really long time to get to, is you asked who's the lead maintainer. And the answer is Bitcoin Core no longer has a lead maintainer. I myself also actually kind of thought there was until I verified, and I was trying to check up. Well, I guess I forgot who the lead maintainer is, but there is none. In fact, we have to get into the history of this and why that's the case. So there is no person who runs Point officially in title. As we all know, with social circles, you can intuit what you want on like social hierarchy and dominance. But in title, there is no official lead maintainer. So let's like roll the clock back. Where did the code originally live for Bitcoin back when Satoshi was writing it? And I had to jog my memory. It was originally posted on SourceForge, which is kind of like a message board, but proto GitHub. And Satoshi and other contributors worked on this. They would email it back and forth and like work on the code and run the clients and stuff. But then Satoshi left, and that's when Gavin Andresen took formal lead of the project. There was kind of that torch handoff that Satoshi had to Gavin Andresen. And Gavin led the migration of the code and creating a Bitcoin repository on GitHub. So in 2014, that repository and the project officially becomes like referred to under the name of Bitcoin Core. That Gavin hands it to Wladimir von der Laan, who most people don't know, but then Wladimir was the lead maintainer for the next 9 some odd years.
Legend.
Legend. And they did it with relative like inconspicuity, whatever, low profile. They did it with a relatively low profile in a relatively neutral manner. Think about it. That's the block size wars in the middle of all of that, and the Bitcoin Core conspiracies. Then we have what I think is an underappreciated shift in how the governance of the Bitcoin GitHub repo works, which happens when he who must not be named, but we will in this podcast, Craig Wright, backed by billionaire Calvin Ayre and head of the fork Bitcoin Satoshi's vision, leverages the tools of the state and the courts to sue people with their giant treasure trove, with Calvin's giant war chest. Sue people, and it like created incredible stress and friction for anyone who is in any kind of leading capacity for Bitcoin. And Wladimir, kind of for a bunch of reasons, decided to just step back and no longer be the main guy. And so there has honestly been a bit of like wandering the desert since then. It was understood that Wladimir was the one who like owned the Bitcoin account, which owns the actual repository where Bitcoin Core lives. And then under that account, you're the owner, but you can designate admins and people with like certain access privileges. And so it is not known who Wladimir, if a person or an entity or a group of people or a network of people, how that account was handed off. We just know that it was that Wladimir was no longer the guy. And so now we have no lead maintainer, and this is specifically the stated reason for this is because there will be more Craig Wrights out there, whether it be the state or individuals or wealthy, insane billionaires who seek to use what is really a comparatively small amount of money to inflict huge friction and pain on the project of Bitcoin, and to leverage particularly the social and legal layer to make people's lives difficult. And so that's part of why the structure has kind of evolved the way it is. Now, I'll make the assessment. I feel like it's a pretty fair, egalitarian. It's in a pretty good place as it is. But there is some warranted conspiracy and speculation about how neutral is the project if we don't actually know who owns the GitHub repo. Because the GitHub repo itself, I will push back really hard and say that itself is not Bitcoin. It, however, is the absolute clear guiding light of what Bitcoin is. So the Bitcoin network itself is the code people choose to run. But the repo that people download all their code from, the ownership of that is actually surprisingly murky. And this is one of the criticisms and subject of conspiracy that the Knots camp had, which was, we don't know who it is. The banks, the spammers, the CIA, Mossad, they're in charge. Everybody's working for them. And while we cannot prove that's not true, they don't seem to be behaving like that. I think accusations of complacency and appeal to process are good accusations for another time. But that's actually kind of how we got to where we are today and why we don't have a lead maintainer. And it's also why talking about this to the average pleb, or even trying to explain this to your dad, it's just so confusing. And this is why if a dumb little reporter dawdles along and Googles a couple things, is what? We don't know who owns this. They can spin up some conspiracy and it can take on legs of its own and run really far. And so we could go a few other places after this if you want to, unless you have a couple questions. I was thinking maybe I could give you a little TLDR on this the new guy.
I'd love to learn more about Charlatan. I just wanted to double tap what you said.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to explain how Bitcoin works without explaining how it's maintained and how upgrades are pushed and how they're integrated into the system. Yeah. And if you start explaining this, you almost sound like a crazy person. And you almost sound, you try to, this is why my father-in-law will never touch it, because if I tried to explain any of this, he'd say, this is a $2 trillion asset and the code base, you don't even, first of all, he wouldn't even know what that is, but he would say, and no one knows who actually operates the code base. That just breaks a lot of people's worldview, especially I think older generations with institutional trust. I think this is part of the reason why Bitcoin has been such a younger person's game. If you grew up in a time where every world event just chiseled away your trust in institutions, and you have the internet to kind of augment that feeling and show you all the reasons why those institutions no longer deserve your trust, you're going to think something like Bitcoin is actually not that crazy. It's also why for the older folks who are into it, they tend to be more of the Austrian camp, right? Or, gold bug adjacent. So
yeah, and you make up a really good point. I actually think your dad's hypothetical criticism is a pretty good one. And this is also why I would say, what if there were multiple clients that implemented Bitcoin and we had different risk profiles we could assign to them? Maybe Bitcoin Core, I'm thinking hypothetically, maybe Bitcoin Core is one of the most technical legitimacy, mindshare, history, review, but the actual ownership of the repo itself is a little ambiguous. Now, anyone could go fork that repo, copy that, start their own exact copy of Bitcoin. It's like, it's really more of like, it's almost like you have a Facebook page, and like everyone can download the Facebook page, but like if you post something fake on the Facebook page, it can do a lot of damage. Doesn't mean that like you own what is reality and information, but it's like you have a lot of influence. And so the ambiguity and unknown, like kind of like nature of that hierarchy and that governance structure, which is GitHub and platform specific, could be an issue. So other clients could say, we have a different team. Maybe it's a private company. It can allow users to assess risk better. And I think investors are like this, but I know that's a toxic word for a lot of the technical folks. So that said, or it could be like other Luke Dash Juniors who aren't insane. Maybe other like, crusaders who wish to take upon themselves like infinite work for personal vision. There's a few of those out there. And then it makes it more feasible for them to do it. And they can accumulate acolytes to run their code for them. I think this actually can be a good thing. Okay, so this new guy. Again, he has two pseudonyms, Sedited and the Charlatan. I think I'm going to just refer to him as the Charlatan because that's what his IRC chat name is. Long time comp sci guy from Europe, went to university, studied your sciences and your computer sciences, and he worked on a lot of like wallet vulnerabilities, including wallet vulnerabilities in other ecosystems, namely Monero, which is the only like somewhat okay blockchain to have feelings for if you're a Bitcoiner these days. And because it's really difficult, and because like Sedited, or I'm sorry, the Charlatan, I would say might be a little bit like of an outsider in terms of like his like entrance into Bitcoin contribution. I think that might be why he had been working on separating the consensus out and contributing to that project. And it also just requires a lot of very specific domain specific knowledge. And so years go by, a lot of contributions, regular hanging out in IRC, and I assume some in-person meetings to, grab a beer and be like, hey, I'm a real person. I actually, I'm not some AI model on the other side of the screen. That has garnered a lot of trust. I've got some quotes from it. I'll kind of like wrap up with a couple quotes here, which is, I asked him in an interview recently, pretty directly, why he is working on this and his view on other client implementations besides core. And he said, quote, I would be fine with other alternative clients competing with us, hopefully reusing the kernel library to at least guarantee they can stay in consensus with us. I kind of welcome the competition. And I personally, I really like that. I really want folks like that to have kind of a little bit contrarian views for the project, because a lot of people like this is the thing with these open source projects, there's like this implicit kind of loyalty that is expected, and that's because there's been a lot of enemies which try to subvert the goals of the project. And so like when it's something like Bitcoin Core, they're obviously anxious about people who have like non-core conventional views. So this really is honestly a bit of like a letting down of the guard by core, not for like a bad reason of like they're slacking on their duty, but rather they're not circling the wagons as tightly because they're like Bitcoin is in a new era. It's much bigger than a small conference room software project. It is now multi-trillion-dollar asset, and it's on a path to become $100 trillion asset. And so I love to see this. We'll see how it goes. I don't know like how far along we are in the project. One of the things the Charlatan told me is that, because I didn't know like what the status of like the Bitcoin kernel consensus separation was, because I just honestly cannot figure it out. It's like, well, quote, we need to do a bit better at public engagement and communication. To which I say, damn straight. Like, if Core and a lot of the Bitcoin devs have a communication crisis problem revealed so clearly over the past year. And yeah, so I'm excited. What I almost feel like this didn't have to be a news item, but because it's kind of our beat, it's a news item, and it's almost like we're making it a news item. But I don't really see other people covering this, and because it's so like deep in the weeds of like how Bitcoin works, I don't know if anybody like outside of the weird dev circles even follow this. But this is so important. Like, it's wild to me that I guarantee you Michael Saylor doesn't know any of this shit.
Most executives probably don't, outside of the ones that you would expect to care about this. You know, maybe your Jameson Lops, maybe Dorsey, you know, but maybe not even him. Yeah, the thing that really makes this notable for me is it's not necessarily that we added a new maintainer, although congratulations to Charlatan. It's why we added him. I say we, you know, like this is a sports team that I'm a part of.
I didn't oppose it, but also, yeah, my vote wasn't.
But, you know, my point being the rationale behind, okay, he's specifically being appointed as a 6 maintainer, partly because we want to give other Bitcoin clients the opportunity to stay in consensus with us and encourage competition. I think it's a good thing after all of the shitstorm that we went through last year, and just to get the monkey off of Core's back, right? And kind of put some of that scuttlebutt to rest, that they're out to just dominate Bitcoin, right? Or that there's some grand conspiracy.
And the thing is, I think most of the grand conspiracy claims are really weak. They're weak as heck. Give me some real conspiracies about Bitcoin, because I bet you could concoct them. And because I'm all about informed conspiracy mongering. None of this like half in the bag, like bullshit. Like Gloria Zhao, you know, did these things to get maintainer appointment, because that's very absolutely not clear. It was very much a merit-based appointment. So like, get good with
including by Luke, who acked her appointment and said she doesn't have a choice because she's too good.
Bro.
Anyway,
we should end it there.
Yeah.
I want to CTA call to action. If you got this far, go make sure to read the newsletter, the profile piece I put out yesterday, Friday, on the Blockspace podcast. Otherwise, make sure to like and subscribe, and tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your dad about this episode, because the next one next week is gonna be spicy.